This is George Dionne of the Rock is George podcast, and this is a KNAC.com exclusive interview with bassist PHIL SOUSSAN. Before we get to the music, I understand that you live in California, and I wanted to know if you've been affected by the California fires.
Very close. I mean, I have a house there. I have a house in Vegas as well. I'm in Vegas at the moment, but the house in LA was in the Hollywood Hills, not a mile from Runyon Canyon, which is the canyon that burnt in the sun, what was now being called the Sunset Fire. And so our house and our neighboring houses were all evacuated, and we were helpless. We were just watching it on television, and we couldn't go there. Obviously, couldn't fly there, couldn't drive there. And one fire sort of turned around and went back, and then a fire on the other side of the hill started blowing up in the same direction. And a couple of times I thought I really wasn't too optimistic, but somehow by the grace of God, we were okay. Of course, that really doesn't make it any better for anybody else. So many people were so much less fortunate than myself and than ourselves. And so, you know, I'm actually doing a benefit on let's see, next Wednesday in LA to try to raise some money just to help whatever we can do. I don't know if it's going to make any difference. I don't know, but you know, we're going to try to roll up our sleeves and do something. You know.
Yeah, every little bit counts, right?
Yeah. But it's heartbreaking. It really is. I mean,
It is.
I'm sure you've seen the pictures, but it literally looks like an atom bomb has hit. Everything's just gone black. So.
Well, I'm glad that you and your family are okay, and obviously we continue to pray for everyone else that's kind of dealing with this madness over there in California.
Yeah, that's all we can do.
So on to the music now.
Yes.
Your current project is Prophets of Addiction. If I knew absolutely nothing about Prophets of Addiction, how would you describe the music to me?
Well, it's kind of a sort of neo-American glam punk sort of thing. I mean, punk to me means something very different because I grew up in it. Sorry, one of my dogs. In the real sort of the real punk era, which was a bit of a movement as well as a musical thing. So that when you take that movement away from it, that social movement away from it, I think it just becomes a little bit less. What's the word I'm looking for? A little more superficial. However, it certainly had a musical influence on lots and lots of bands. And, you know, around that whole time, the Hanoi Rocks era that came over here, there was this new version of sort of punk that was a glam punk thing. And that was pretty cool. I really liked it. Prophets of Addiction, and, you know, I'm just a producer on that album. I produced that record. I mean, I did play on it, but it's not my band, so to speak. But I've worked with Les for a long time, for many, many years. I have a lot of time for him because he's a fantastic writer. He really does write great songs, great lyrics, great melodies. He's got a great sort of pop sensibility about him. And so over the years, you know, he's asked me to do things, and I've been glad to participate, help him out with albums, help him with mixing. I think every single record he's done has somewhat got me involved. I've been involved on. So, you know, that's sorry, my dog wants my undivided attention all of a sudden. Go on, get out of here. Go guard the fort. So that's how I got involved in it. So it's, you know, he called me up one day and said, "Hey, listen, I think we can make a record from scratch." And in the past, it's been. Hey, listen, I've got these recordings I did over here, and I've got this stuff over here, and I've got these tracks, and we sort of piecemealed it and put it all together, assembled it. But here we managed to do something from start to finish, and it was just a lot of fun. We're good friends, and he's a great guy.
And you mentioned working with him in the past. You actually worked on past Prophets of Addiction albums behind the boards, and kind of your role increased as the album started to continue coming out since 2010.
Yeah, whether it was mixing, or whether it was mastering, or mixing and mastering, or whether it was just adding parts, or helping with with overdubs, and we've just been doing stuff over the last 2 decades. So there's been a lot of stuff that we've put together, but a lot of his stuff is great. I mean, it's he did a semi-acoustic album that's fantastic. I mean, all the stuff he's done has got something that I really enjoy, and it's a slightly different style of music to the kind of music which I typically do. So anyone who knows me knows that I'm sort of very open to lots and lots of different styles of music. And so it's really nice to be able to spend some time spending a little bit of time in these different styles, and it keeps things different. It keeps things exciting, and more importantly, I think it's the basis for a great deal of inspiration, because I think that new ideas come when you start to take, focus on unexpected types of music and bring them together, and so good things come out of it.
I don't think I mentioned the name of the album. The name of the album is Face the Music. And as producer, obviously you have a role behind the boards there too, and you played bass on the album. Did you have a chance to get involved a little bit in the songwriting?
Not as such. I mean, when we're working on lyrics and vocals, sometimes we'll be stuck for something and we'll say, that doesn't feel right, or it doesn't meter right, or it doesn't sound right, it doesn't make any sense. And, we'll soundboard off each other a little bit, but that's really the extent. Certainly when it comes down to producing, I had a lot to do with the arrangements, the parts, the solos, actually, writing solos. I'm a big believer in writing solos. It's to me, the greatest solos are the solos that the bus driver can sing. You could get great solos in, Journey songs and stuff. People gets the solo and everyone sings along with it. Having a memorable solo is not a bad thing. It's great to have the widdly little stuff, but after a while that becomes it sort of becomes this texture rather than actual notes. And I like memorable lines. I like phrases. I like things that you keep hearing in your head all night long. So yeah, I get involved in that.
Do you think that solos are kind of something missing in modern rock music today?
No, not at all. No, I think this. I love listening to solos. I think a solo to me is really the part that kind of musically ties together all the lyric with lyric melody with the music. It can be so many different things. It can be a conversational question answer thing. It could be something that complements. It could be something that just breaks the ice and takes off. It could be kind of things that are very emotional. I mean, I listened to some Jeff Beck solos and stuff, and they really are incredibly emotional. So they run the gamut. I can't generalize. I can't say one solo is the definitive how it's supposed to be. But very often in a song, if you spend a little bit of time thinking about it, you pretty much get an idea of what kind of solo is going to be appropriate, what's going to work. So,
Prophets of Addiction have a couple of songs out as promotional singles, so to speak, and videos. Let's Get High. That's a very memorable chorus right there. Simple to the point, kind of like the 70s rock of the day, right?
Yeah, sure. And, obviously the song is not literally about what it sounds like it's about. And it's really more about, it's more about the excitement that used to exist when you went out and bought a record and you'd play it for hours on end and you'd just be elated, right? You couldn't hear stuff on demand. You didn't have a phone where you can just like, oh, okay, well, I want to listen to this and I'm going to listen to it 8 times. You'd have to turn the radio on and hope it comes on, unless you went and bought the record. And then you could sit at home and then you could listen to it. Your friends could come over and you could all listen to it together. And I think that's a bit of a throwback to that experience, which is a lost experience. It's too bad.
The industry's kind of bringing that experience back with the resurgence of vinyl. I'm not sure it's gonna catch fire like it was back in the day, and I think it's something marketed at you know, people like me in their late 40s going into 50s and stuff like that. But I've also seen a lot of kids out there buying vinyl. I don't know if it's for collectible purposes or to actually play.
Yeah, maybe all of the above. I don't know. Collectible purposes, sure, that's a big thing these days. After all, the ways in which you can acquire music are digitally. In which case, you get to, you get to go out at night and go up to somebody and try and impress them and say, "Hey, do you know how big my hard drive is?" And that's one form of music. The other form of music is, of course, having it as a CD where you can put it into your car and you can listen to it track by track. Vinyl is different. It's mastered differently. It does sound completely different. I do vinyl mastering, and you can't just send a CD to a mastering house. They'll reject it. They'll send it back and say, "No, we're not cutting this. It'll burn one of our lathes out." So you're not going to do that. So you have to adjust it sonically. And believe it or not, it's actually a much, much smaller image. People say, "Oh, vinyl sounds huge." It's not. It's actually much smaller. And because it's much smaller, you can put a whole album on and listen to it without fatigue, as opposed to listening to something which has the dynamic range of this and that has low frequencies on the left and on the right and everything's split. I mean, imagine a good parallel would be like if I gave you a kaleidoscope and had you look at a kaleidoscope for 20 minutes, you'd be, "Oh my gosh, I got a headache," as opposed to looking at an incredible artistic piece of film or something, or which is much more palatable, and you can look at it for longer and you can look at it without fatigue. I think that's what it is. So when people buy vinyl albums, the nice thing, I'll go to a friend's house. I've got several friends who have huge vinyl collections. And one of the things they'll do is we'll sit down for a drink. They'll put an album on, and we'll listen to the whole record. And all of a sudden, I'm listening to this album in continuity, and I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's a cool bit. That's a cool song. But then it gets to the end, and you feel like you've had an experience which is different from just listening to songs. So that may be a new experience that younger people might want to discover, and in the process, I think they'll love it. I'm a big fan of I'm a big fan of vinyl, but I'm a bigger fan of what the vinyl actually brings to the table.
Right. I got about 1,000 vinyl on the other side of the camera over there.
Do you really?
Yeah. The problem is they're not really focusing a lot on the equipment to play the vinyl.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's stuff out there. I mean, I think you'll remember how anal people used to be about their stereo systems. Yours truly, it was no exception either. It was crazy. I had all of this hi-fi stuff and cassette machines with them, graphic equalizers and all kinds of garbage. I mean, it was tons of stuff. And really, it doesn't need to be that. I mean, it just has to be a fairly decent amplifier. Most turntables are decent enough to do a damn good job of playing back a vinyl record. If you buy a reasonable cartridge, I think you're 50% of the way there. So it doesn't have to be too expensive. You do have to mount the turntable on something really solid, though. Otherwise, it won't move back.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
You get a great cover of Rod Stewart's Maggie May on this on this album. Stays kind of true to form. Doesn't take too much liberties with it, but certainly jazzes it up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do to improve that song? It was one of my favorite songs, I think, ever. I'm a big fan of early Rod Stewart, and of course Faces, and that's just a nostalgic, great song. And so what we said is we thought about doing a cover for a long time, and I think Les actually came up with it, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think it's a brilliant idea, but let's turn it into an attitude punk version and bring as much attitude as we can, but we'll stay true to the arrangement." I played it for Carmine a piece, and he loved it, and he played it for Rod, I understand. I guess Rod really liked it, so that was kind of cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever bumped into Rod Stewart yourself? You've been in the business for a while.
I've done stuff with Rod Stewart. I did a video with him. I did a video for Back in My Arms Again. This is about 20 years ago or so, a long time ago. Before he started doing his kind of more of this kind of the Vegas show thing that he does. So it was like the tail end of his kind of more solo independent thing. And yeah, and I was in that video. So, and I've worked a lot with his previous band members in many different projects. So, it's very close to home.
Now, promoting new music today is a lot different than it was when you were first starting out as a musician. There's a lot
Oh
more
yeah.
artist involvement, a lot more artist engagement with the fans through social media, and it's not just the label kind of putting the word out there these days.
No, I mean it's a very much more of an active process. The idea that you now have, I mean, look, I got my studio here at my home. I can make records here all day long. I can distribute them digitally, so I can do everything as a one-stop shop, and so can everybody else. And so what that means is there's a lot more stuff to sift through, and you have to do a lot more work to get the music in front of somebody or to attract somebody's attention. What can you do about that? Well, I don't know. If you're an established artist, it's a lot easier, of course. But if you're not an established artist, you're a new artist. There's so much information online of how to market your music, but it is not a simple process. I mean, I read this it was a brilliant article that said how to, I think it was called something like how to release a song in 6 weeks, and it gave you 6 weeks of work, and you had significant work to do on every single day of that 6 weeks leading up to the release. You pre-promote it, you pre-market it, you have to do so much stuff. For me, my interest wanes a little bit with that. I would much rather be creating music and playing music than marketing it. I mean, it's bad enough even a few years ago that to be a simple bass player like me, you'd have to, all of a sudden you have to be a clothing designer, a fashion expert, a photographer, all of these things. You had to take on all of these things, which you have to be aware of. And sometimes all you really want to do is, get up there and just play, because that's what that 1 hour or 1 hour on stage that you have is the focal point of everything else that you have to do. So I'm sure that listeners can relate to this, because we've all been down there. How do I get people to hear my stuff? It was easy.
Yeah, it seems like today it's throw it against the wall and see if it sticks, or just put it out into the universe and hope somebody grabs it and it takes off.
Well, I mean, it used to be like that. I think even with record labels, I think that's how they did themselves out of a job. There was certain record labels who should remain nameless, but one that's named after a famous ocean was starting to throw stuff out there, like in the late '90s. I mean, just throwing out dozens and dozens of records. And if something stuck, they would get behind it, and if it didn't, they'd drop it. And there was no real promotion. I think it's to do with the way that the music had sort of grown. So there was a time, I suppose, in the '80s, maybe even before the '80s, before MTV, when you could have a band that was known in an area in the United States across maybe 3 or 4 states, real successful, and they'd make a career out of turning around those states and turning around and turning around and turning around, and they would get such a huge following that eventually they would get a record deal. Somebody would come in and say, we should make a record, and we'll put the record out, and then we'll promote it, and we'll start to get you to play around, and that's how it was built. Well, with the advent of MTV and the smaller media world, all of a sudden that process became reversed. You got bands who had never played, who had never toured, all of a sudden doing records and putting them out there. And if the record sells, then we'll put you on the road, which is a little ass backwards when you think about it, right?
Right.
So what's happened now is it's gone back to the live show again. I mean, that's the only part that you cannot replicate, and you cannot really bootleg. You can give somebody the music and say, here's the music, please come to the show. The show is where it's at. And so the onus is gone back onto the show. But I think that's what happened, I think, in the mid '80s, that was the biggest change I saw. So
do you think, like, now, this is how I think, maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, like back in the day, you had the show to sell the album. now you have the music to get them to the show.
Yeah, yes, the music is a loss leader in a business term. You know, so I've used this example before, but we used to, you know, give you a free headband and a lighter and a cap and a cheap concert ticket and say, come to the show and please go and buy the record. Now we give you the record and say, please come to the show and buy a lighter, buy a headband, you know, and buy all of the merchandise. So we're really in the merchandising business. That's what the source of revenue. That's what we monetize now, is the concert experience, the concert tickets, and of course the big corporations are going where the money is, and now they're sort of doing with concert tickets, sort of what they did with the record albums in the latter days of the record labels. And I'm not a big fan. I don't like seeing people paying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars for tickets. You know, it's just it's too much. I mean, people are gonna. I mean, how can people do that?
It seems what they're doing is because they can't sustain the big tour anymore, because there's markets that just aren't making money. It seems like they're taking the bigger markets, focusing everything there. It drives the price up because that particular radius they're trying to get is going to that one point. So if they could try to continue that model, but I feel like maybe it's going to go back to bands are going to be regional and build up regional followings and keep it there.
Well, people are going to run out of money is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the macroeconomics of what's going on, you know, people have had a lot of money that they got during COVID. They got used to spending money and not doing much work. And then after the money ran out, which is just very recently, all of a sudden, they haven't changed their habits. They're still spending money. They're just putting it down on credit card debt. You know, credit card debt in this country is 1.4 trillion, 1.3 something trillion, which is insane. I mean, and you know what the interest on that is? It's not like 5%.
Right.
Average 28%, some people higher. So that's what's going on. And I think what eventually what happens is that these tickets sales start to slow down. And I've seen a lot of very big bands in very big venues where all of a sudden they're flooding all the empty seats onto Groupon just to fill the seats. And people are starting to get wise to it now. They realize they don't have to buy the ticket until an hour before the show when the price starts to plummet. And this is what happens. And, you know, this money isn't going to bands. I mean, some of it goes to the bands, of course, but the money goes to these big corporations who are doing this. And that's their business model. And they're going to keep doing it until the business changes and something has to adapt. You know.
I hear you.
That's the wonders of capitalism. You do something and then one day it stops working and you have to change it.
Does Prophets of Addiction play live? Is there an opportunity for you to jump in with them somewhere live?
Oh, I might jump up and do a gig here or there, but I'm not. You know, it's not something where I'd be going out on the road with them. But they're trying to plan that at the moment. I'm staying on top of Les because I think that's really important for them to get out and play as much as they possibly can. You know, once you've got a record, you have to go out and play it. Otherwise, you've missed part of the buffet. You know, the whole process is that you make the record, you put the record out, and you get people to come see the show, and then you create a project that way. So you have to be careful, because if you put that record out and you don't do anything, eventually it's going to. Yeah, it might be a great record, but I think it's going to. You know, its novelty is going to wear, and then people are going to start listening to other things, other projects.
I think you have a great point there, actually.
Yeah.
Now, a band you do play in that did recently tour is Last in Line. You, Viv Campbell, Vinny Appice, or Appice, I always get their last names wrong. Andrew Freeman. You guys released an album in 2023, Jericho. It was the third studio album for the band. Fantastic album, by the way. I feel like third time is the charm for Last in Line. How did you feel about the album?
Loved it. Yeah, I thought it was great. It was a very it was a tricky album to do because, of course, we had this whole shutdown that occurred, you know, halfway through it. I mean, it was just a very opportune random idea that we had. We were all in Los Angeles at the time, the beginning of 2020, and we just said, "Hey, we've got a few days off. Why don't we go in the studio and bang some ideas down?" And we banged down some ideas that became the canvas for about 50% of the record. And so that way, when this pandemic happened, we actually had some stuff we could work on. And then the rest of it was put together later on in the proceedings. In the midst of that, we also did the EP, the Day in the Life EP as well. We did some other stuff. We put out a tribute video for our fans, which we piecemealed from video and for an acoustic version of Landslide. But it turned out that because we did record that stuff in January, we had something we could work on, which was great. And it also showed us that we can do an awful lot remotely. I do a lot of studio work, so obviously it's very easy for me to take in files and to aggregate them and compile them. We work a lot with Chris Collier, our fantastic engineer, and so I can send stuff to him, he can send stuff back, and everybody else has their own setups. And even Viv was sort of basically cutting solos in New Hampshire, where he lives, on his system and sending it in. So it's amazing how you can make an album that way these days, right?
You did a pretty extensive tour for that album too here in the U.S. I think it was your first kind of large scale touring.
I don't know. I mean, we did a lot of great stuff around the 2 album as well, and we were going back to Europe a lot. The real tragedy for us with the pandemic was that during that year we had so many festivals that were scheduled, all the big festivals in Europe, the Wacken Festival, and it was something we were really looking forward to. We even had plans to go to South America and even Japan, and all of that sort of unfortunately disintegrated, and we haven't been able to reschedule that yet. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But we did as much as we could in the States with the Jericho tour. So, but there's some great material on it. I think the album sounds great. I love a lot of the material on that record. I think it really sort of was a point where you could see where all these different influences all sort of gelled together from the 4 of us, and it was very apparent to me on that record. So for that reason, I love it. Yeah. We have another one to do right now, so we're working on another record.
That was my next question. Are you working on the 4th record?
That's a good question. We have another album to do. Yeah, we're working on a 4th record, and you know what it's going to be called?
4.
No, I was asking you because I don't know what it's going to be called. No, it's still early days with that. We've got a lot of embryonic ideas, as we usually do. But it's been a slow process. We're on a bit of a hiatus at the moment. It's no secret that Viv's going through some health treatments, and those health treatments require him to be somewhat isolated, completely isolated. And so we have to, we just have to kind of work around as and when we can.
I have an interview with Andrew on Friday, and I will grill him about what the album's title is going to be. Maybe he knows.
Yeah, that's good.
And we'll all cross our fingers. Viv does all right.
Yeah, I think it's a very positive thing, or at least that's the way he's represented it to me. He's a very, very positive person, and I take my hat off to him because it's a tough thing to always be a positive person, but I think it's a great thing. So hopefully everything's going to be just fine. But that's pretty much all I know about it. So
we're coming up on a half an hour. Do you have more time?
Yeah, I have a little more time. Sure. Yeah.
Great. Let's go a little bit into the history of your music career. Let's go back to Ozzy Osbourne days. The Ultimate Sin, 1986. That album's going to be 40 years old next year. Seemed like a rocky time to be joining Ozzy's solo band. Things were kind of questionable at the time of Ozzy doing something or who's going to be in the band? It seemed like there was a lot of chaos surrounding from what I gather from the internet, which is not 100% correct.
Yeah, I think the way I understood it, the way it had been sort of represented to me was that things were not had not gone as well as they had hoped after all the tragedy with Randy Rhoads and the subsequent touring and everything. Um, it had been told to us that Embark at the Moon had not done as well as that they had hoped, and it was quite possibly going to be a final album. So that's when we went into it. We didn't know if it was going to continue for a long time or if it was going to be just a one and done thing. So we were super excited about it, and that's kind of how we sort of got into it.
And with you being the new guy in the band, you co-wrote quite the hit song for Ozzy, "Shot in the Dark," still played on the radio today. I think everyone's pretty familiar with this. Was there any like I don't want to say animosity, but some gentle ribbing that the new guy comes in and he hits a home run?
I don't know. I mean, there may have been something undercurrent. Nothing actually. There was nothing ever, you know, ever said in those words. I mean, I think we all were quite surprised at how well, how well that song did. All of us, because the only reason they'd asked about the song was that there was, we were going to record the record, and I can't remember if it was label or producer or whatever, but they had felt that there was one song that was missing, that they needed an extra song, and so it was the last song that came in, and the big surprise to me was when Sharon said to me, "Oh, we're going to cut a video for that. It's going to be the first release." And I went, "Oh, okay, wow, all right, sure, if you think so." So that's how that sort of all came together. But it turned out, I mean, the rest is history. It was just, if there was any doubt about what was going to go on for the future of the whole Ozzy brand, I mean, that was laid to rest at that point. And like I said, the rest is history.
I think it's a very underlooked album in the catalog. I mean, from the album cover, which is classic heavy metal, down to kind of some of the deeper cuts. I think the song "Secret Loser" is fantastic, and I discovered that in the Charlie Sheen movie, The Wraith.
Yeah. I'm with you. I think the album is a great record. I know there's a lot of comments about the production, and I kind of agree with that. I would have liked to have heard it a little bit more raw. I think it also seemed to be a bit generic sounding as far as the sounds and as far as everything. So there's that aspect to it, and then there's the aspect to it which I think because of the era and because of the time and because of the image, there was all this glittery kind of glam sort of thing that was going through the 80s, and we influenced a lot of bands in the 80s to start to adopt that look, and maybe we took that influence from them as well. I mean, I don't know. It was just we were all in it together. But what happened at the end of the 80s is that everything sort of turned to grunge a little bit and gave a bit of a nod of the hat to early Sabbath and that era, which was all very dark and black and everything else. And I think for that reason, I think I can't talk for Ozzy, but I think he kind of almost wants to put that to the side, because he could get there was a great deal of acceptance and of influence of these new bands for his prior career, which would have been the dark Black Sabbath look. And I think that might have something to do with it. I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing here. I'm very proud of the record. I think it's a great record. I didn't listen to it for a long time, and then it was quite a few years ago, and then people started coming up to me and saying, "Hey, just rediscovered that record. It's a great record." And I said, "Oh, thanks a lot." And I came back. I remember I listened to it just at one sitting, and I came away and said, "Man, this is really a great record. There's some incredible stuff on it. Great playing on it." I wasn't the only new guy. Randy was the new guy as well, and Randy and I were very, very tight friends. We were friends from before we played together. He was probably my life closest friend. and we just were inseparable. And we played great together, and the stuff that Jake did on the records was fantastic. There was just so much great material on that record. So.
How did you make the transition from Ozzy to Billy Idol? You played on the Charmed Life album that came out in 1990.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So I grew up in Maida Vale in London, which is like Paddington. And where I grew up, I mean, when I was in my teens, there was this movement that was being born right in Maida Vale, right in my backyard, and that movement was the punk movement. And so all these bands like the London SS, the Kilburn and the High Roads, the Clash, Generation X, that's where they all came from. And it was very difficult for me to sort of ignore that kind of music because I was being surrounded with it, and everybody at my school was into that, and it was a music of our generation. But I still had this big classic rock influence. So while I respected that music very much, I remember later on I tried to get into some of those bands, and I actually worked with a guy called John Tao, who was Generation X's original drummer. And John and I worked together a lot, and John was trying to get me into these punk bands. And I was about 4 or 5 years too young. So I missed that boat. And it always bothered me, you know. So when the opportunity comes up to go work with Billy Idol, now you understand why I jumped on it. And I said, oh my gosh, this is like a bucket list thing I've always wanted to do. And that's how that came together, and that's why that came together. So it was really a terrific opportunity for me.
Did you tour with Billy Idol? I wasn't sure if he toured.
No, I did some shows with him. Yeah, I did a few shows with him here and there, but I never actually, you know, toured. We spent most of the time in a studio doing an album, and so that was most. It was about a year actually, so it was a long time. Yeah.
You also appeared in the movie The Adventures of Ford Fairlane with Andrew Dice Clay as a part of your collaboration here with Billy Idol. Was this your first movie experience?
Yeah, I mean that wasn't. Funnily enough, the track off there, "Rock the Cradle of Love," was in that movie. But I was doing that with Vince Neil in the band. We had this fictitious band called Black Plague, and that was the band that was featured in the movie. So there was these two kind of connecting things that we did. But that was a lot of fun doing that movie. I had a great time. I worked with got to know Wayne Newton and Priscilla Presley. And I was a huge fan of 50s Americana rock and roll growing up. And so to meet Priscilla Presley was like was amazing. I was a huge Elvis fan. I loved all the early Elvis stuff, the Sun Sessions going up to about the Gold Suit era. And it was that kind of music was just a huge influence on me. I went off onto a whole Bill Black and Scotty Moore kind of thing, and started learning all of that music. And to this day, you know, a lot of my favorite songs are from that time period. Yeah,
it's amazing how Elvis has managed to endure over all these years. You know, he's, and we still seem to find music that Elvis produced that was never released too.
Yeah. There's just tons of stuff, but you know, some of that early stuff as well was akin to punk music as well. I mean, it was so socially unacceptable, and it was brash, and it was loud, and it was powerful, and it was, you know, if you pick up the Johnny Burnett and the Rock and Roll Trio album and listen to that, it could have been a punk album from today. It was just the energy in that was amazing. And of course, you know, people are familiar with maybe Train Kept a Rolling, which he got a hit with, although he didn't write it. But you know, there's a lot of bands have their roots in that music. A lot of today's bands, and so, you know, it's definitely worth going through those archives and listening to that stuff. You kind of raise your eyebrows a lot. Wow, that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Also in 1990, you appeared on an album by Beggars and Thieves,
Uh-huh.
This featured Billy Squier drummer Bobby Chouinard. Was this a session gig for you, or were you a member of the band?
Well, actually, the first album we did, Bobby had played on the demos, but another Bobby played drums on that. It was Bobby Borg, and that was a full, a complete band. And we released a self-titled album called Beggars and Thieves on Atlantic, and it did okay. We toured it a little bit, but it's a great record. And the band went on to do something else afterwards. I left to go work with Vince, and then they kind of kept it going for a while. And I think Bobby Chouinard played on some of the stuff after that.
Okay.
Yeah, Bobby was a great drummer, man.
His nephew is from we went to the same high school as his nephew Roger, and Roger's got a band out that's kind of opening for LA Guns in several different places across the country called All Sinners. And
Okay.
he also owns a record shop in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is probably one of the better record shops over on this end.
Yeah. Oh,
And
so
of course, he plays drums too.
yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, what I remember about Bobby was because I worked and I did some sessions with him and stuff. I was in New York for a while, and he was this guy who would just come in and he couldn't wait to get paid, go out, get a couple of drinks. That was his whole thing. So the playing part was like, I need to get this out over the way, out the way as quickly as possible. But this was one of these guys who would come into the studio, literally sit down, play it, nail it, first take, feel everything, absolutely perfect, done, get paid, and then leave. Very, very hard thing to do. And he would do it without fail. He was incredible. It was just incredible feel.
Wow.
Amazing.
You also have written a couple songs for Toto. That kind of surprised me. I didn't think that knowing the bands that you've been in through the years that we've discussed, I'm like, Toto, that's interesting. How did you end up starting to work with Toto and Steve Lukather?
So Toto, there was also I spent a lot of time listening to various different styles of music, and one of the styles of music that I listened to a lot was what we used to call jazz fusion, which today I think is called yacht rock, right? So I mean, I love that stuff. Listening to that stuff in the late '70s and early '80s, and I would listen to many different artists, and Toto epitomized that. I mean, those guys actually played on most of those records anyway. It was the Picaros, and it was and David Page and all of those cats who played on that stuff. So I met Luke I met him in Japan actually when I was with Ozzy, and we hit it off, and we stayed in touch. And it was every time we got together, we'd be hanging out and listening to music and talking about ideas. And I was producing some stuff, and he heard it, he loved it, and he said, we should work on a record. And I said, okay. So we decided to work on a record, and that was the Luke album. And I wrote about half of that record, and then that worked so well. We had a great writing relationship. Very hard to find writing relationships with people because a lot of the time, you sit down with somebody and say, okay, what are we going to do now? And in this particular case, he plays something, I play something. It just sort of fed off each other, and within a very, very short period of time, we'd usually come up with good stuff. And then we started writing for other things as well. We wrote a great song for Bernard Fowler, the guy who sings backups with the Rolling Stones. And then I wrote a song with him that ended up on a Toto record, and I think it got nominated for a Grammy as well, which was After You're Gone on the Minefields album. But for me, I love that kind of music. I love that style of music. And it was fun working with Steve through all those things.
Outside of music, I understand you're into investing and wealth management. I was kind of checking out your social media page. When did you kind of first take an interest in that, or did somebody kind of get in your ear about getting into that and investing your money?
I came from a background of I was going to be a doctor. So I have quite a lot of I spent a lot of time in education, higher education. And one of the things I studied was economics. I took an economics A level because just because I had to take an A level degree. A level is in English kind of halfway to a master's degree, and I had to take this A level for a particular medical school wanted me to take it. So I did a cram course in it, and then I thought, well, I'm going to do one subject. I might as well do something else. So I thought economics, and so that's where I sort of got a bit of background in economics. I also, I don't know. I had an experience, I think, where in the early '80s, my dad used to do stuff like that, and I'd given him some money. He said, "Give me some money, I'll invest it for you." And I gave him some money, and I think it was September of 1987. 4 weeks later, it was Black Monday in October, and the entire market collapsed. Good time to get into investing, right? Basically lost everything that I put into it. And I thought, oh, well, whatever. And it wasn't until a few years later, I was talking to my dad, and I said, oh, I wanted to do something. And he said, well, do you remember that money that you gave me? And I said, yeah, it disappeared, right? He said, well, not exactly. He said, it all collapsed. And then it was so low, I kind of added some more stuff for you. And now you've got this. And I had this nest egg, and I didn't realize I had it. And so immediately I sort of started to understand how this whole thing works and how the whole business works. And I became fascinated by it. I started reading a lot about it and trying to understand not just how to invest, but the principles behind it. I mean, the whole principle behind life. People think that, you just, I don't know, you make it and you get rich. But that's not how it works. What you do is you make a little bit of money. I think, who was it that said that? It was Bob Hope. He said, somebody said, oh, you made so much money, they named an airport after you. He goes, well, I didn't really, it was so much money doing films or doing whatever. And he said, no. He said, I made a little bit of money doing films, and then I bought property, and then I made a lot of money buying property. And that's how he established as well. And I think that's how it works. You make little tiny bits of money, and then what you do with it, the decisions that you make can really benefit you. I love to talk to people about this. I love to talk to people in my industry about it. I love to try to help anybody I can, because nobody teaches you this stuff at school. And, when you're in a business such as music or any of the arts businesses, there's no steady paycheck. You might make a lot of money one year, you might make nothing the next year. And how do you manage this situation? And there is a way to do it. There is a way to do it that's very, very smart, and you can do extremely well into it. And as long as you have a moderate amount of success, anyone can participate in this. But you have to be smart, and you have to be, wise about it, and have a long-term outlook on it as well. So that's fascinating to me, and I love talking about it. I talk about it for hours, as most of my friends will tell you. After a while, and they sort of glaze over a bit. Like, how about that Last of Mine album? So that's kind of why I got interested in it, and indeed I know quite a bit about it. The more I learn, the more I realize how little I know about anything. But that's just typical of anything else, right?
So I think certainly as a young person, when you get kind of the generic investing advice, it scares a lot of people away, because it's like, oh, you're going to put 20% of your paycheck over here, and you're going to try to do another 30% over there, and you're like, that's 50% of my paycheck. How am I going to live?
Well, Warren Buffett has a great saying, which is that you don't save what you have left after spending. You spend what you have left after saving, and it's important to save. My godfather, which wasn't like a Sopranos godfather, it was just my family's friends, but he was a terrific man. And he said to me before he passed away, he said, I'm going to ask you two things, and I'm going to ask you to promise me that you'll do these. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, first thing I want you to do is promise me you'll always respect your parents. And I said, okay. And then the second thing is, I want you to promise me that you always put a little bit of money aside for a rainy day. And those are the two things that he said to me. And that's what you have to do, I think, always. We earn money, but we are trustees of that money, of part of that money, because part of that is taxes, and you're never going to get out of paying taxes. And the thing is, if you make $1 and you pay 20 cents of that in tax, the government's trusting you to hang on to that 20 cents, but it's not your money. You've got to give it to them. And so a place where people really go wrong is that they forget, and they spend that, and then all of a sudden they find themselves with tax problems, yet alone trying to save for themselves. And if you start to look into it, you'll find that the same government, we know how good the government is handling their own money. They're the last people you want to handle your retirement account, right? But they do give you benefits for it. They say, look, if you save, then we'll help you because you won't have to pay taxes on what you save, and we can structure this for you. So there are systems in place where it's a really good idea to start to get into that discipline and start to understand, look, if I put my tax money aside, and if I save X amount of money here, what do I put into? Well, that's a whole different set of discussion. But hey, and then whatever's left, I can freely spend and feel completely guiltless about it because I've taken care of my other duties and my other obligations. And that's really the way to look at it. I mean, it sounds like it's, overly, I don't know, scarily responsible, but it really isn't. And I think the real tragedy is that even the most, rebellious of, musicians and artists out there, in later years, they'll turn around and they'll say, man, I really wish I'd have kind of started this a little bit earlier. And that's why I try to talk to people, especially young people, and say, hey, listen, someone needs to talk to you about this because they don't teach you this shit in school.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely.
They don't teach you any of that stuff.
So it seems a lot of the things, well, a lot of stuff that you hear and see today about investing, and I don't want to bore people too much because this is a music interview, but day trading, people just kind of just dump it in there and try to make a quick profit, kind of like the whole GameStop thing. Everybody's kind of picking a stock and trying to drive it up. Is that a great investment, or, better, like you said earlier, that you got to plan for the long term?
It's not an investment. That to me is a bit of a crapshoot. And so if you want to play that, then go ahead and do it, but do it with a very small amount of your basket. I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't come to Vegas, go into a casino and put down a few bucks onto a craps table. That doesn't mean to say you put your entire farm onto that craps table, right? But if you get a little bit of fun doing that, then knock yourself out, enjoy it. I do think you have to, balance that with some better ideas. And I would say that the culmination of everything I've ever learned about investing and about the markets can be summed up in one sentence, one phrase, which is risk management. That's it. That's the whole secret to investing, is managing your risk and managing your downside, not losing what you have. If you can do that, you're 90% ahead of the game. So it's very, very important to put your money into investments. What's an investment? An investment is something that you anticipate going up. If you put your money into a car, that's probably going to go down. That's what you would call a calculated loss. It's not going to go up. People say, oh, buy this new car. It's a great investment. It's like, okay, can you redefine that for me? So if I can come back next year, I can sell it back to you for more than I paid for it? I don't think so. So that's not an investment. So you have to understand that an investment is something you're going to buy where your upside is going to be far more likely than your downside. And again, this I'm just scratching on the surface of some conceptual ideas, but if you can get into details, and there's many ways of finding out where to put your money and what to do and how to balance it out. But later on, once you've got a bit of money, if you're just starting out as a kid, you don't want to bore a kid. Sure, you got some money. I mean, the first thing you could do is just save it. The second thing you can do is called passive investing. Put it into an index fund. Hey, I'll own a little piece of 500 companies, the 500 top companies in the United States. I'll buy a share of the S&P of SPX. I don't know, once every few weeks. Go read a book. I'd encourage your readers, listeners, to go read a fantastic book by Peter Lynch called Learn to Earn. And it's really written for young kids, and it's very readable. and you'll come away with some incredible concepts that that you will carry through for the rest of your life. It's a terrific book.
I think I'll check it out myself.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, are you working on any other music projects?
Yeah, I'm working on a new solo record.
Ah, nice.
Very excited about it. We had a little bit of time, and I just started messing around with ideas, and it's just how it happens. All of a sudden, I went through my phone where I keep a lot of my, conceptual ideas, and started piecemealing these together. Before you knew it, I had 4 songs. I've got 4 songs finished. I've got another 3 I'm working on right now. I've got another 7 or 8 on the go. I mean, I've got a whole album here. So it's pretty cool. I'm very, very excited about what I'm writing. So that's been really, really cool.
Been a while since you released a solo album, right?
It has. I mean, the last one was No Protection, which was, it was a while ago now. And that was a great record. But, in the meantime, I started working on all these other projects. And, of course, Last in Line, we've been working full time. When you're working on something like that, you only have so much creative focus, I think. And so, it's like trying to be in 2 places at once. But as we had some downtime here, all of a sudden it was like, these ideas have sort of been burning in my head. And I said, okay, I'll start putting some things down, start, writing some songs. And it's very, very cool. And I'm having a lot of fun working the way I'm working. I actually got some drums in the next room, and I've been putting drums down, been playing a lot of the stuff myself. So that's fun.
Awesome. I'll be looking forward to that. And those are all the questions I have for you today, Phil. The new Prophets of Addiction album is Face the Music. It's out now through Brave Words Records. And Last in Line, their latest album is Jericho. It's out now through Ear Music. And I want to thank you for taking the time today and taking a full hour. I really appreciate you teaching me about all the projects that you have going on, a little bit about investing there too. And I wish you the best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much, George. It's thanks for having me, and I appreciate all the conversation that we had today. That was fun. It was an enjoyable chat, and I encourage people to, if we can stimulate somebody to have more than a passing interest in any of these things, then that's been great.